Chapter 71 Killing, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How could 30-plus guys lose to one dude? And not just lose, but get wiped out with his bare hands? The guy was a straight-up monster. Charlotte saw the manager staring back, sweat beading on his face, eyes wide with panic. Charlotte smirked and started walking towards him, with Charlotte closing in. Step by step, Manager Fei finally lost it. You. Stay back. Don't come any closer. Stop right there, or else, or. Manager Fei was shaking like a leaf, hands flailing, trying to sound tough, then his eyes landed on the explosive collar, number 98, clamped around Charlotte's neck, and it clicked. He remembered the detonator. He fumbled for the remote in his pocket, snatching it out. Stop right there, 98. You don't want to die, you better freeze. Manager Fei, seeing the number, quickly punched in 98 on the detonator. Seeing the remote, Charlotte frowned for a split second. He'd almost forgotten about the damn collar. Fei, sensing the shift in power, puffed up again. Number 98. Back to the cage, now. Or else. Manager Fei's voice dripped with arrogance, brandishing the detonator. He'd been thoroughly spooked by Charlotte just moments before, but Charlotte didn't listen. He just kept walking. Number 98. Did you hear me? I said stop. You got a death wish. Manager Fei's voice was cracking with desperation. Charlotte didn't acknowledge him. He just kept coming. Seeing that Charlotte wasn't backing down, Fei's face hardened. Fine, you want to play it that way? Don't say I didn't warn you. Manager Fei slammed his thumb on the red button, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He was picturing Charlotte's head exploding. Beep. 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 The red light on Charlotte's collar flashed like crazy. Charlotte just smiled faintly at Manager Fei's ugly mug. That tiny smile sent a jolt of fear through Fei. What the hell? Why is he smirking? He should be terrified. Manager Fei cursed silently, his mind spinning. The other slaves in the back room saw it all, smiling in the face of death. These slaves, captured and waiting to be sold, were suddenly struck by something. In that moment, Charlotte's ruthless image transformed into something noble. Maybe death wasn't so scary after all. Bang. The collar blew, enveloping Charlotte in a cloud of smoke. The explosion echoed through the front hall, silencing the auction. An explosion. Wells knew instantly. The sound sent a fresh wave of unease through him. But seeing that no one else seemed fazed, he tamped down his urge to investigate. Damn it. What's Fei doing back there? Dowdu cursed under his breath, but his face remained a perfect mask as he continued the auction. Even Mayor Hoyle, in his private box, frowned. What's going on backstage? Explosions every few minutes. But Hoyle held his temper. He trusted Fei to handle it. Ha 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 ha. That's what you get for fighting back. Just be a good little slave. What's with all the resistance? Manager Fei's cackling filled the back room. The slaves hung their heads, unable to look at Charlotte's headless body. They didn't even know his name, but they'd never forget number 98, daring to smile at death. It made them think about themselves. Could they die for freedom? Anything was better than slavery. The laughter grated on their nerves. Even the guards standing along the walls stared at the center of the explosion, their faces unreadable. It was the first time they'd ever seen someone smile at death. The Red Earl still wore a smile too, his eyes glued to where Charlotte had been. He refused to believe it. Charlotte wasn't dead. He was the man he had approved. How could he die like this? Hey! What are you laughing at? A voice cut through the air, right next to Fei's ear. Manager Fei's laughter choked off mid-guffaw. Why did that voice sound so familiar? He turned his head slowly. The smoke cleared, revealing Charlotte. You're alive? Manager Fei gasped, staring at Charlotte's undamaged body. His exclamation carried through the back room, and everyone looked up to see Charlotte standing behind him. They stared in disbelief. How could anyone survive that? It was impossible. Why wouldn't I be? Charlotte casually placed a hand on Manager Fei's shoulder. Fei froze. Now that the explosive collar was useless, he had no idea how to deal with this slave. Seeing that he was speechless, Charlotte grabbed him by the neck. He activated his observation hockey, instantly reading Fei's mind. Your heart is truly rotten. After seeing the contents of Manager Fei's heart, Charlotte's expression soured, and he quickly cut off the mental link. Charlotte's gaze shifted toward the front hall, the auction house. How can such a depraved place exist? Charlotte seemed to see right through the wall. Thanks to his observation hockey, he knew exactly what was happening in the front hall. Charlotte looked at the supervisor in his hand and flung him toward the front hall. Manager Fei flew like a ragdoll, with no chance to brace himself. The force sent him crashing through the wall. Bang! What the? Dowdu was mid-spiel when a sudden pain exploded in his back. Manager Fei's body burst through the wall and plowed into him. Boom! The crowd went silent, stunned by the sudden violence. Even Wells shot to his feet. His hockey picked up a familiar presence on the other side of the wall, the signature aura of his surveillance target, Charlotte. His muscles tensed. Your Excellency, Major General. Seeing Wells' reaction, the colonel called out in confusion, but Wells silenced him with a glare. The colonel bristled, but knew his place. What's going on? Seeing a figure flying through the wall and smashing into Dowdu, the nobles roared in outrage. Dowdu was instantly covered in blood. Chapter 72 Killing, 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You bastard! What do you think you're doing? The angry shouts came just as a figure emerged from the wreckage of the passage Manager Fei had smashed through. Charlotte grinned, taking in the furious faces before him. Anyone who knew Charlotte knew that look meant someone was about to die. Ha 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 ha. Charlotte strode to the center of the auction platform, his wild laughter echoing through the hall. The crowd, princes, nobles, and wealthy merchants, were incensed by this young man's antics. You little punk! You got a death wish? Get off the stage. Get him out of here. Yeah, get lost. The room filled with curses and jeers. In a private box on the second floor, Wells blanched. Beside him, the colonel was slumped on the floor. Summer. Charlotte. Mayor Hoyle, watching the scene unfold from his box, frowned and waved to the men behind him. Take him out. A bodyguard in a black suit nodded and leaped down. Thump. The dark figure landed in front of Charlotte. Charlotte stopped laughing, his eyes fixed on the man in the black suit and sunglasses. Okay, now we're talking. Instantly, Charlotte felt the man's killing intent. Without a word, the man lunged at Charlotte. Bang. Charlotte casually raised a hand to deflect the kick. Shave, huh? CP, are you? What's CP paying these days? The first exchange told Charlotte everything he needed to know about his opponent. The man in the suit frowned, surprised that someone recognized the technique. He became instantly wary of the boy in front of him. After the failed blow, he quickly retreated. Rankyaku. A sweeping kick shot towards Charlotte. Charlotte sidestepped, and the blade of air struck the Red Earl, who had just emerged from backstage. The Red Earl coated his arm in hockey and caught the attack barehanded. Whoa! The man in the suit gasped. One dodged it with ease, and the other caught it with his bare hands. Who were these people? The rest of the crowd stared at the Red Earl in disbelief. Was that even humanly possible? Seeing that the Red Earl had drawn everyone's attention, Charlotte smirked. He shot forward, grabbing the man in the suit by the neck. Caught completely off guard, the man couldn't react. Charlotte activated his mind-reading ability. In an instant, he knew everything about the man in the suit. Ha! So, you're a lapdog of the world government, CP9. Charlotte said with amusement. After reading his mind, Charlotte was momentarily speechless. Did CP9 only operate in Water 7? The man in the suit paled. He tried to shoot. His fingers jabbed rapidly at Charlotte's body, but it felt like he was hitting steel, and the pain shot up his fingers. Humph! Charlotte sneered. With a final squeeze, he choked the unlucky man to death. Mayor Hoyle, watching from box number 1, had had enough. He stood up as his bodyguard fell. Throwing open the door to the box, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hoyle, the mayor of Water 7, and the owner of this auction house. Pleasure to meet you. Could you please stop this for my sake? Whatever's gone wrong, I'll make it right." Hoyle looked down at Charlotte from the second floor, his tone mild and placating, but Charlotte's smile vanished. So, this auction house is yours, huh? No wonder you thought you could enslave me. His friendly face instantly turned dark, his gaze fixed on Hoyle with murderous intent. Hoyle's eyes widened, sweat beaded on his forehead as he frantically dabbed his brow with a handkerchief. Wells, in his private box, finally understood. No wonder he'd turned water 7 upside down looking for Charlotte yesterday. He'd been a slave in this auction house the whole time, but how had anyone managed to catch him? That was the question bugging Wells. Wait. Sir. This is a misunderstanding. Hoyle struggled to maintain his composure, gesturing frantically to his men while trying to reason with Charlotte. He knew this was bad, he just needed to buy some time for his subordinates. Hoyle's eyes flashed as he continued, it's all a misunderstanding. We're willing to compensate you. How about 500 million berries? You can also take 3 items from the auction house. How does that sound? Before Charlotte could even respond, the crowd's eyes were wide with greed. 500 million berries. Most of them weren't even worth that much. And those 3 items, they were the real prize. Hey, kid. Get out of here. This ain't your fight. Charlotte turned to see a burly man with a beard yelling at him. Yeah. Boy, you don't even know what you're up against. While the boss is being reasonable, get out of here, or I'll kill you myself. A chorus of angry voices joined in, their faces contorted with jealousy. Charlotte's expression darkened. The Red Earl leaned back, watching with interest, curious to see how Charlotte would handle the situation. Ha 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 ha. I wasn't planning on a massacre, but your attitude has really pissed me off. Looks like I'm gonna have to use your blood to calm myself down. Charlotte grinned, the dried blood on his face only adding to the menace. The crowd stared at him, momentarily stunned, then burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. Did you hear that? He actually thinks he can kill me. Ha 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 ha. Boy, do you even know who I am? I'm the Grand Duke of the Arabian Kingdom of Palestine. And you think you can kill me? Ha ha ha. The Grand Duke's laughter echoed through the hall. The others joined in, their eyes mocking Charlotte. They laughed at his arrogance, at the idea that killing a few guards gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. The taunts fueled Charlotte's anger. If you want to die, I'll be happy to oblige. A wave of overwhelming arrogance emanated from Charlotte, silencing the crowd. He restrained himself, using just enough power to force the crowd to their knees. Thump, thump. One by one, the occupants of the auction house collapsed, staring at Charlotte in shock. They had no idea what was happening to them. Chapter 73 Killing, 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Damn it, even Major General Wells was cowed by the intense pressure radiating from her. Unlike the others, though, he didn't freeze. Your Majesty, the Major General, the colonel beside him scrambled off his stool and knelt on the ground, sweat pouring down his face. Charlotte, ignoring them, strode towards the ones who'd been shouting insults. Wells panicked, he fumbled for his transponder bug, but even before he could activate it, the device short-circuited, emitting smoke. Crap. Even the bugs fried by her power. Wells' expression darkened as he stared at the useless device. He didn't realize Charlotte had deliberately overloaded it. Now, fueled by fury, Charlotte needed to kill to release the rage building inside her. Anyone within a 50-meter radius who could communicate was a target. The instant Wells reached for the bug, Charlotte sensed it and used her power to shut it down. It was child's play for her. Charlotte continued her deliberate march through the auditorium, the horrified gazes of everyone in the audience fixed on her. She stopped in front of the Grand Duke who'd started the jeering. Grabbing him by the throat, she sneered down at him. Think I wouldn't dare kill you? You. The Grand Duke began, his face turning red. Snap. The sound of bones breaking echoed through the hall. All eyes were on the Grand Duke, now limp and lifeless in Charlotte's grip. No one could believe what they were seeing. He actually dared to kill him. A nobleman in opulent robes watched the Grand Duke's head loll to the side, his face contorted in terror. Ah! Murder! Help! Someone's been killed! Navy. Get the Navy. There's a killer here. Security. Where's the security team? Someone's been murdered. The auction house erupted in screams. On the second floor, Mayor Hoyle, still kneeling, stared at Charlotte, aghast. He never imagined she'd be so reckless as to kill a nobleman in broad daylight, in front of everyone. This was poking the bear. He could already envision the fallout, other nations putting pressure on the world government, and his auction house would be the first to suffer. His life might even be at risk. At the very least, he'd be fired. Hoyle's face twisted in fury. Get her. Kill her. Hoyle dragged himself forward, pointing at Charlotte and screaming. Kill her now. Hoyle's enraged shouts from the second floor were lost on Charlotte. She had her sight set on the next person who'd mocked her. She grabbed his head. Think you're funny, huh? Charlotte whispered in his ear. Hearing Charlotte's cold voice, the young man trembled with fear. Starred that he farted. Charlotte recoiled. Seriously? He was so scared he crapped himself. Seeing Charlotte's disgusted expression, the Red Earl, sitting on the auction stage, chuckled heartlessly. His laughter boomed through the hall. LOL 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 LOL. Charlotte glared at the Red Earl, then back at the boy who'd just soiled himself. She pointed her finger at him. A powerful force shot from Charlotte's fingertip, piercing the noble boy's head. The force of the impact detonated his skull, splattering brains everywhere. The sight terrified everyone around them. Ack. Ack. Lords, ladies, staff, all turned pale with horror. They scrambled backwards, but Charlotte's power pinned them in place. It was clear Charlotte had absolute mastery over her domineering aura, controlling it with precision. The Red Earl watched with a sigh. This young pirate had the strongest control he'd ever seen. Quiet. Seeing the chaos, Charlotte roared, but everyone ignored her, continuing their cries. Help. There's a murderer here. Sheriff. Someone call the sheriff. Where's the auction house security? People screamed in panic, enraged that she was being ignored. Charlotte shouted. Ha 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 ha. Don't want to listen. You die if you don't stop screaming. Charlotte pointed at those who were shouting. Bang, bang bang, bang bang bang. Each sound of pressurized air meant another person was dead. Each victim was hit in the forehead, which then exploded. The Red Earl clicked his tongue. This was a truly bizarre sight, heads exploding one after another, showering the room with gore. Anyone who saw this would throw up. Wells also witnessed the carnage. Tears welled in his eyes as he stared at the scene. He never imagined he'd see something like this. Nobles were being executed for shouting. Wells tried to stop her, but an overwhelming force crushed him. He knew it was her power. Wells fell to his knees, the hatred for Charlotte burning in his heart. He hated his own cowardice and powerlessness, but there was nothing he could do. Everyone still alive lay on the floor, heads buried in their hands, afraid to make a sound because those who dared to speak were now headless corpses. Charlotte's blood-red eyes scanned the room. Silence reigned. You could hear a pin drop. Charlotte lowered her hand, surveying the peaceful scene. The tension in her chest eased, but Charlotte wasn't finished. She hadn't forgotten the real instigator. She turned her gaze towards private box #1. With a single leap, she landed inside the box. Hoyle stared at her in shock as Charlotte grabbed him by the collar and jumped back down. Spare me. Please, spare me. After Charlotte released him, Hoyle knelt at her feet, clutching at her trousers and begging for mercy. Charlotte felt no pity. Instead, she bent down, grabbed Hoyle by his white hair, and stared into his eyes. Is this your auction house? Charlotte asked, her eyes piercing. Chapter 74 Killing, 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hoyle didn't get it, but he still nodded anyway. Charlotte beamed at his agreement. Great. I picked the right guy. Then, her face hardened as she looked down at Hoyle. Your auction house. You dare kidnap me and try to sell me off. How do you expect me to forgive that? Charlotte ranted, completely ignoring Hoyle's discomfort. Hoyle's face turned red as Charlotte held him up by the neck, but he was helpless. His life was in her hands. He didn't dare resist. Damn it. Where are those goons? He cursed inwardly, thinking of the auction house thugs. Hoyle struggled, kicking his feet, trying to break free, but he didn't know that Charlotte had already taken care of the 30-plus thugs back at the auction house. And what about his deputy? Hey! Isn't that Charlie? What's the rush? G. Benz was wandering around the auction house when he spotted a familiar figure. It really is Charlie, the mayor's right-hand man. Seeing Charlie, he hurried over, eager to suck up to him, since Charlie was usually hard to catch. Of course, Cabin was buttering him up because of Mayor Hoyle. If he could get in Hoyle's good graces, he'd be set for life. On this little patch of land known as the City of Seven Waters, everyone would have to respect him, so, when he saw Charlie, Cabin ran over to say hello. You are? Charlie eyed Cabin suspiciously. I work for Chief Fei. Name's G. Benz. I'm in charge of finding slaves for the auction house. Don't you remember? We've met. Cabin said obsequiously, sidling up to Charlie. Recognition dawned on Charlie's face. Oh. You're the guy with Director Fei. Right, I remember. Then, Charlie turned to leave. What's the hurry, Charlie? G. Ben asked, noticing Charlie's anxious expression. There's trouble at the auction house. A slave escaped. The mayor told me to round up some muscle, but where are the auction house's thugs? I can't find anyone, so I have to go to City Hall and get the sheriff involved. Charlie explained as he hurried along. Cabin perked up immediately at the mention of an escaped slave. This is my chance to shine, he thought, grabbing Charlie's arm and pulling him back. Charlie. You're talking to the right guy. I'm a pro slave catcher. Why bother the magistrate when you've got a top guy right here? Cabin said under Charlie's wary gaze, but Charlie's eyes lit up. He's right. Why run off to the sheriff when I have a professional slave catcher right here? Am I stupid, Star? You're right. Let's go stop this lawless slave. Charlie said, grabbing Cabin's hand and heading toward the auction. Hold on. It's just a slave. Let me call my boys first. They're right over there. G. Benz said. Charlie relaxed, nodding. Jack, get over here. Cabin shouted toward the bar they frequented. Boss. Jack led everyone over, setting down their drinks. All right, listen up. This is Charlie. The mayor's right-hand man, a big shot in this town. You'll call him Charlie from now on. G. Ben said, gesturing toward Charlie. Charlie preened, but didn't forget his purpose. Let's get a move on. After all, there are still a lot of people in the auction house, right? We can't just stand around. Right, let's go. G. Benz waved his hand, leading a group of rough-looking men toward the auction. At a glance, there were 60 or 70 of them, each armed. These were the local slave-hunting crews. Cabin was pulling out all the stops to impress Charlie. Boss, what's up? A one-eyed trafficker with a long knife grabbed Jack and asked. Jack looked around, then lowered his voice. Something went wrong at the auction house. A slave escaped and is causing trouble. Our boss wants to impress Mayor Hoyle, so we're all going. Got it. The one-eyed man nodded, his eyes gleaming. He wanted to impress Mayor Hoyle. Too many shared his thoughts, and the group marched toward the auction house, heads held high. Meanwhile, back at the auction house, Charlotte had unleashed her full force, and no one dared to shout anymore. Ah! 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 Charlotte stomped on Hoyle, crushing his legs bit by bit. The crowd watched in silence as Charlotte repeatedly crushed Hoyle's legs, afraid of drawing the lunatic's attention. Yes, they all thought Charlotte was a lunatic, a bloody one. Ah! Please! Spare me! I'll make amends. Hoyle, covered in blood, begged. Just moments ago, when he'd admitted to owning the auction house, Charlotte had suddenly stomped on his knees and wrists. He'd heard the bones break. Spare you? Who will make amends to the poor souls you've sold off? that ever since encountering this man named Hoyle, Charlotte had seen all the evil he had done. She didn't like to meddle, but if she saw something that unsettled her, she had to take care of it, or she wouldn't have peace of mind. Click star. What? Hoyle screamed again. One of his hands was bloody pulp after Charlotte stepped on it, bone fragments mixed with flesh. The pain made him want to pass out, but the pain kept him awake. The Red Earl, witnessing this scene, finally understood Charlotte's nickname, the Blood Swordsman. This guy was a bloody pervert, while he, too, was a bit of a pervert, often eavesdropping on people's inner thoughts. Charlotte was on a whole other level. Bang, star. Squeak, Chapter 75 Killing, 6. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The door splintered open. Everyone, even Hoyle with his limited mobility, snapped their heads towards the noise, but when Hoyle saw who it was, he burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. You're dead. You're dead. Hoyle cackled, seeing his backup arrive. His career as mayor was over, there was no coming back from this. And if he couldn't be mayor, he'd take down the guy who ruined him. Get him. Beat him to a pulp. Torture him till he dies. Hoyle, sprawled on the floor, screamed at Charlie's men, his face twisted in a hideous grimace. Seeing the mayor's sorry state, Charlie rubbed his eyes, not believing what he saw, but after seeing the crippled, blood-soaked figure, he almost couldn't recognize his boss if it weren't for the familiar voice. Quick! Quick! Get the mayor out of here! Charlie shouted, grabbing Caben's arm in his panic. Caben also took in the sight of Mayor Hoyle. He gasped. The man's former dignity was gone. His gray hair was plastered with blood, and his black suit was shredded. The elegance was gone. Then he saw the kid standing on Hoyle's back. Hey, Caben sucked in a breath. Wasn't that the drunkard he'd sent over yesterday? The sky seemed to be falling. The slave he'd supplied was standing on the mayor. Even if he recaptured him, there was no guarantee Hoyle wouldn't blame him. Caben was convinced his life was over. He didn't even bother to think about catching the slave. With over 60 men on their side, they could bury him alive if they had to. Charlotte, on the other hand, watched the 60-plus men with idle curiosity. He ignored the cussing coming from under his foot. The Red Earl shook his head. These guys were basically walking into their own funerals with Charlotte, the god of death, on the scene. A wasted trip. Let's go, boys, save the mayor. Yeah, save the mayor. Seeing Hoyle pinned, the men charged at Charlotte, weapons raised. Predictably, the loudest cheerleaders hung back, waving their weapons from the rear. Charlotte didn't flinch. He kicked Hoyle away, not to make trouble for himself, but because Hoyle wasn't worth it. Besides, he didn't want Hoyle catching a stray blade in the brawl. Seeing the horde rushing him, Charlotte grinned, baring his teeth. He summoned his blood greatsword. His fists tightened. If the sword hadn't been broken, he would have preferred to use that thump, star, without hesitation. As the first man swung his knife, Charlotte delivered a lightning-fast punch to his chest, crack, star. Charlotte's fist was like a cannon. The force went straight through the man's body. The man died instantly. Charlotte didn't even glance at him, withdrawing his arm and plunging into the crowd like a tiger on the hunt. Ack! Ugh! Arg! Screams echoed everywhere. The sounds of pain went on and on, leaving the survivors stunned. Everyone was frozen in place. What? Hoyle stared in disbelief, momentarily forgetting his own pain, as he watched Charlotte tear through the men like they were nothing. Who is this slave? How is he so strong? Hoyle had expected them to make him pay, but they were just serving themselves up as lunch. Caben snapped back to reality, no longer worried about Hoyle's wrath, but about how to deal with the monster in front of him. As more and more men fell, those in the back panicked. He's a freak. A monster. Run. It's a monster. One of them broke and ran, and the others followed, dropping their weapons and scrambling for the exit. But Charlotte wasn't about to let them off that easy. He leaped forward, cutting off their retreat. Ha 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 ha. You came, you don't get to leave. Charlotte laughed, staring down the survivors. The domineering energy was flowing out of him, but under Charlotte's careful control, no one fainted. They just felt a heavy weight pressing down on them. Freak. Weirdo. Monster, that they were terrified by Charlotte's ferocious appearance. The devil. The devil. This is the devil, that seeing Charlotte blocking the path, no one dared to fight. They scattered in different directions. This auction house was huge, with plenty of exits to bypass the main gate. Charlotte tore through the crowd, savoring the thrill of the kill. The darkness in his heart was beginning to lift when he had awoken. A black cloud had settled in his mind. The cloud was aimed at the entire auction house, and a voice had been whispering to kill everyone inside. The feeling had been a burden, and Charlotte had felt an uncharacteristic need to take action. With each kill, the weight lifted a little. Using the Navy's Rokushiki shave technique, Charlotte hunted down the last of the fleeing men. He breathed in the thick, metallic scent of blood. In the auction house, savoring the feeling, he was soaked in blood. When Charlotte finally stopped moving, everyone except the Red Earl, who was still watching from the stands, was speechless. The princes and nobles who'd been hiding under chairs, Charlie, Cabin, and the few remaining lackeys, all stared at Charlotte, dumbfounded. None of them had seen this coming. Their confidence had turned to stunned silence, but underneath that, a deep, creeping fear had taken root. Even Vice Admiral Wells was in shock. Wells watched the massacre with cold hands and feet. A chill ran up his spine. He'd never seen anything like it. Bodies torn apart, heads crushed. The sheer brutality shook him to his core. Even as a Navy man, he'd rarely witnessed such a scene. Fighting pirates usually involved cannons. Chapter 76 Killing, 7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If guns aren't an option, it's just hand-to-hand combat, like a knife fight, or maybe a flintlock shootout from a distance, but who can take on someone like Charlotte bare-knuckled? Ugh. Finally, someone couldn't take it anymore and threw up on the floor, and that triggered a chain reaction. Almost instantly, a dozen more people with weak stomachs joined in. Bleg. Charlotte glanced at the mess, but quickly looked away. Vomit wasn't exactly a captivating sight, but Charlotte herself was feeling a little off. After all that killing, the bloodlust in her eyes started to fade. It was like waking up, looking at the corpses around her. Charlotte didn't regret it, but she was annoyed at losing control of her emotions. It bothered her. She thought she was over the side effects of her conqueror's hockey. Turns out it had all been building up, and those people at the auction just set it off. Charlotte knew all too well about the drawbacks of her hockey. That's why, during her training, she deliberately skipped observation hockey sometimes, to lessen the influence of outside emotions. She thought she had it all under control, but here she was again. The intense fear radiating from everyone around her made her uneasy. It gave her a twinge of guilt, but she knew that was just the hockey talking. Subconsciously, Charlotte moved closer to the Red Earl. Whoa, whoa. Stay away from me. You're covered in filth. Seeing Charlotte approach, the Red Earl scrambled to his feet, backing away in disgust. Charlotte frowned. She was annoyed, but then she looked down at the blood all over her clothes. Okay, fair enough. Even she was a little grossed out, covered in blood like that. No. I can't let this happen again. I need to maintain that cool, arrogant persona. I've spent years perfecting my swordsmanship for this. I can't ruin my image. I need to be more like Hawkeye my hawk. This can't continue. Just as Charlotte was making a mental note, Cabin and Charlie were leading their men towards the exit, hoping Charlotte wouldn't notice. They knew their only chance was to escape. Crap. Cabin, who had been nervously watching Charlotte, shouted as soon as he saw her eyes land on them. Run. And they bolted for the door. They had been inching closer to the exit, so when they made their break for it, they were already halfway there. Think you can escape? Charlotte smirked, and then vanished. Her perfected version of the Navy's shave technique was blindingly fast. In an instant, she was right behind them. This group was actually making it easy for her. After bursting through the door, they stuck together, as if afraid Charlotte couldn't get them all at once. Maybe they felt safer in a group. Blue walk. Charlotte swept her leg through the air. A shockwave of white energy shot from her foot. It sliced through the entire group at the waist. In a horrifying instant, they saw their lower bodies running ahead of them. They didn't get far before collapsing. So fast, that was their final thought. Thud. The ground was littered with severed torsos and spilled guts. The scene was clearly visible to everyone near the auction house. The sight of Caben and Charlie storming the auction with 60-plus guys had drawn a crowd of curious onlookers. They didn't dare go inside, but they lingered nearby, listening to the faint sounds of screaming. They assumed it was some escaped slave getting hunted down. Then, after a while, they saw a group of men burst out of the building, their faces etched with terror. They recognized Caben and Charlie, the notorious slave trader and the mayor's assistant. Important figures in Water 7. The fact that they were running away looking so scared made the onlookers wonder what the heck was going on inside. Then, a young man appeared in the doorway and unleashed a kick. What happened next left them speechless. A white shockwave shot from the young man's foot, slicing through the fleeing men. They were instantly cut in half. Some women screamed at the sight. Charlotte glanced around, then went back inside and shut the door, but the damage was done. The scene had been witnessed by many, and one reporter even snapped a photo of Charlotte. The reporter had seen the 60-odd men rush into the auction and followed his gut. Now he'd stumbled onto a major scoop. He knew the editor would be ecstatic. He didn't recognize Charlotte, just assumed he was some arrogant rookie pirate back inside the auction house. Charlotte's quick cleanup had taken only seconds. The remaining people who had been considering escape immediately froze. They prayed Charlotte hadn't noticed them, but she had. Even without hockey, she had sensed their intentions. Charlotte ignored them. She walked over to Mayor Hoyle, who lay on the ground like a discarded dog. Hoyle was just lying there, writhing in pain. Without even trying to scream or resist, he seemed to have accepted his fate. He was finished, and even if he somehow survived, he'd be a cripple. He didn't have many years left anyway. Seeing Charlotte, Hoyle managed to smile. Ha 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 ha. Just you wait. The world government will avenge me. You'll be hunted by the world government and the Navy. Ha 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 ha. Those were Hoyle's last words. Chapter 77 Shackles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After hearing Hoyle, Charlotte curled her lip, unimpressed. Please. I've been a wanted pirate with a 5 billion belly bounty on my head for ages. You think I'm scared of a bounty? For her, a higher bounty just meant more fame, which wasn't a bad thing. One kick to Hoyle's head shut him up for good. Charlotte exhaled, finally feeling the tension ease from her body and mind. The gloom lifted, making her genuinely happy. Seeing the blood on her clothes, she ripped off a layer, and one of the nobles quickly offered her a brocade robe. Ryder, fancy a bath? Charlotte raised an eyebrow at the Red Earl. He returned the gesture, wrinkling his nose at the smell of alcohol clinging to him. Ha 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 ha. Let's do it. He agreed with a nod. After a second of consideration, Charlotte kicked open the auction house's back door, leaving behind a scene of chaos, corpses littering the floor and terrified survivors huddled under chairs, lucky to be alive. Charlotte hadn't killed everyone. Go. Are you going? A trembling voice asked from a corner. It was soft, but clear in the silence. Go. Let's get out of here. Some of the braver ones echoed, glancing around to ensure the killing god was gone. Run. I'm never coming back. A disheveled noble cried, bolting for the gate. The others surged after him. Bang. The gate crashed open, and the survivors poured out, tripping over each other in their haste. Roughly 50 people escaped. Considering nearly 300 had attended the auction, plus late arrivals and auction staff, over 250 had been massacred. These survivors owed their lives to a moment of Charlotte's mercy. Onlookers gasped as the nobles streamed out, transformed from their former arrogance into something resembling beggars. The auction house emptied quickly, leaving behind only Wells and the Navy. Wells stared blankly, oblivious to Charlotte's departure. How could this happen? How could he be so brutal? He muttered, eyes glazed over the corpses. Major General. Sir. The colonel cried, seeing Charlotte leave and his superior's catatonic state. His nerves were better than Wells. Wells didn't respond, continuing to murmur. Major General. The colonel yelled, right in his ear. Ah. Ha. Wells snapped back to reality. looking at the Colonel swallowed hard. "Sir, the pirate Charlotte has gone. Should we pursue him?" That he prayed they wouldn't. The memory of Charlotte's rampage made his legs shake at the very mention of her name. "Pursue him. Of course, we'll pursue him." Wells replied automatically, then hesitated. "Wait. I'll make a call first." Wells pulled out his den mushy, only to find it foaming at the mouth, completely unresponsive. "What's wrong?" Wells muttered anxiously. Not being able to contact headquarters was a disaster. "Major General," the Colonel said, noting Wells's distress. "Yes. Send someone to keep watch from a distance. Once the den mushy recovers, we'll report to headquarters and get orders on whether to pursue," Wells ordered. "Yes, sir." The Colonel snapped to attention and saluted, then hurried out to give the orders. He'd heard about the bathhouse. All they had to do was watch it. Wells collapsed into an armchair, back soaked in sweat. Meanwhile, in the back, all the slaves looked towards Charlotte with hope. They'd heard the chaos from the front. The screams, the pleas. They knew who was responsible. Charlotte felt the oppressive atmosphere of the slave pens immediately. She walked straight to the cage holding a little girl, puzzling the Red Earl. When the girl saw Charlotte, she instinctively cowered back. Charlotte smiled gently and, ignoring her wide eyes, snapped the lock on the cage. Then, she moved on to the next cage, tearing apart the locks one by one. She didn't open the cages, just unlocked them, leaving it to the slaves to push them open themselves, forcing them to choose freedom rather than simply being handed it. With that done, Charlotte returned to the Red Earl. "Let's go," she said, and they left. No one dared open their cages. The doors could be pushed open with a touch, but no one moved. Finally, the little girl whose lock Charlotte had broken stirred. She dragged herself to the cage door and pushed it open with her dusty little hands. Crunch. The sound echoed through the back. Everyone watched the little girl. She took a tentative step outside the cage, then turned back to look at her prison. "Ha ha 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 ha." A silver bell-like laugh erupted from the little girl's face. She smiled, seeing her laugh. The other slaves lifted their heads and pushed open their cage doors. Chapter 78 Invitation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Hoo. Laughter erupted, everyone letting loose, overcome with joy. They finally knelt and bowed towards the direction Charlotte had gone. They were free. Only those who'd known despair could truly appreciate freedom. Charlotte, ever observant, noticed everything. She led the Red Earl out the back of the auction house and started looking for a bathhouse on the street. Unbeknownst to him, his crew was tearing the city apart looking for him. "Paul. Where'd the boss go? We agreed to meet up, and he's just vanished." Down by the port, on the deck of a ship, a group of crew members surrounded Paul, peppering him with questions. Paul stood there, frowning, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. He knew the boss wasn't one to be late. Something must have held him up. "Hold on a minute. Maybe something just came up," Paul said, trying to reassure them, then turned to Isaac, who was standing nearby. "Isaac, if the boss isn't back in half an hour, take some guys and start searching. I'll stay here and watch the ship. If he shows up, I'll send up a signal." Isaac nodded, agreeing. After another half hour, with still no sign of Charlotte, Isaac and 10 others headed into the city to look for him. Meanwhile, Charlotte was luxuriating in a fancy bathhouse with the Red Earl. "Ah, this is the life." Charlotte, eyes half closed, enjoyed the masseuse's touch. "Ryder, have you thought about joining my crew?" Charlotte asked, looking at the Red Earl, who was also relaxing. "Is that your way of recruiting?" The Red Earl replied, dodging the question. "We get along great. You could be my right-hand man. What do you say?" Charlotte persisted, leaning back in the tub. "Are you planning on leaving the Rocks Pirates?" The Red Earl asked, his tone serious. "Pretty much." Charlotte didn't elaborate, knowing Rock's downfall was imminent. The God Valley incident was about to go down, and he needed to plan his escape. Once a pirate, always a pirate. Charlotte was stuck with the label for life. Oh. You think rocks will just let you walk away? The Red Earl raised an eyebrow. Even though he hadn't known Charlotte long, he knew he wasn't one to act without a plan. Would you believe me if I told you rocks would be dead within the year? Charlotte asked, staring intently at the Red Earl. The Red Earl's expression turned serious. He didn't bother asking how Charlotte knew something like that. Instead, he just stared back, pondering for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. I'll pass. The Red Earl didn't look at Charlotte, his voice firm. Oh. Charlotte's lack of reaction surprised him. That's it? Shouldn't you be asking why I'm saying no? You don't seem all that interested in recruiting me. The Red Earl smirked. Do I look like the normal type to you? Charlotte retorted, rolling his eyes. He'd expected the rejection. He didn't think he could just convince a loner like the Red Earl to join him after one day. Ha! Touché. The Red Earl shook his head. Interesting indeed. Every conversation with Charlotte was a blast from the past. Communicating with others was different. He already knew what others would say, even their next thoughts. The Red Earl hadn't felt this sense of fun since childhood. It reminded him of a pirate group filled with laughter he'd met as a kid. That was the first time he'd ever felt truly happy. Now, he was feeling it again with this person. So, what are you doing in the first half of the Grand Line? Got a mission? No worries if it's classified. The Red Earl took a sip of wine from his goblet. Charlotte squinted, relaxing against the tub, watching the masseuse's swaying breasts. Nothing I can't talk about. I've got a weapon I'm trying to get my hands on. Heard there's a small island in the first half with something perfect for me. Figured I'd check it out. How's that sound? The Red Earl's eyes widened. Is that right? Let me know if you find it. I'll come back and finish our unfinished business. The Red Earl's eyes burned with excitement. Charlotte glanced at him. Heh, you gotta wait until you learn how to use Conqueror's hockey to come see me. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance. Charlotte's words stung, but he knew it was true. He'd felt the power of Charlotte's hockey firsthand. A broken sword could cause that much damage. If Charlotte found a weapon that suited him, his power would be off the charts. The Red Earl fell silent. Damn it. I almost forgot about my crew. I would have completely spaced if you hadn't reminded me. Charlotte jumped up, splashing water everywhere. The Red Earl briefly closed his eyes. The masseuse gasped. Gotta go. Gotta go. No time to soak any longer. If I disappear, my crew will lose their minds. Charlotte stepped out of the bath. The Red Earl shook his head and reluctantly got out as well. They quickly dressed and left the bathhouse. Looks like we're going our separate ways. Charlotte said, looking at the Red Earl regretfully. Yeah. The Red Earl nodded lightly, though a hint of reluctance lingered in his eyes. He didn't notice this strange feeling. He was used to being alone, always on his own. See ya around. Charlotte nodded. Goodbye. The Red Earl said with a smile. Chapter 79 Discussions at the Navy Headquarters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Was this goodbye? The Red Earl had a sinking feeling. He'd never felt this way before. Charlotte smiled, heading towards the ship. Her powerful presence washed over half of the city. She noticed the chaos erupting in the center of Seven Waters, probably panic caused by the auction house news, but she ignored it. Boss! Boss! The crew spotted Charlotte as soon as she neared the ship. She waved. Boss! Where've you been? We were worried sick. Paul slid to a halt, grabbing her leg and wailing. Seriously. Charlotte was speechless at the over-the-top display. Okay. I met someone interesting and got delayed. Let's go. Charlotte would die of embarrassment before admitting she'd been kidnapped and almost sold as a slave. Alright, boss. But hold on a sec. We sent Isaac to look for you when you didn't come back. I'll send up a flare to call him back. Paul said, standing up. Sounds good. Charlotte nodded, knowing they did the right thing. Paul pulled a bamboo tube from his gear, *whoosh, *a flare shot into the air, *bang, *a vibrant firework exploded. Isaac, searching for Charlotte in the city, looked up, recognizing the signal. Let's go. Head back. The boss is back. Isaac led his group back to the ship. Charlotte sat on the bow, waiting. Isaac and his men returned quickly. Boss, Isaac greeted her the moment he stepped on deck. All right, Charlotte acknowledged him. Let's get out of here, Charlotte said casually. The crew raised the sails, and the ship slowly pulled away from the port. Sensing something, Charlotte turned towards a figure standing alone on a rooftop, the Red Earl in his purple robe. Seeing the Red Earl watching her, Charlotte smiled and waved. The Red Earl's lips curved into a smile as he watched the ship disappear over the horizon. Thump, star. What? Charlotte caused a massacre in 7 waters. What happened? Cyborg Sora slammed his fist on the table, demanding from the other end of the transponder snail. Sir, Charlotte was arrested by slavers while drunk. She woke up in the auction house and, enraged, nearly wiped everyone out. Only a few survived, Wells reported cautiously. Thump, star. Damn it. That damn Charlotte, Cyborg Sora roared. Sir, we've lost Charlotte's trail. We can't find her, and her ship isn't at its usual port. We've completely lost her. Do you have any further orders? Wells continued. Behind Wells, several people strained to hear the response. The scene at the auction house had terrified them, and they wanted nothing to do with tracking Charlotte. They'd quietly sabotaged the search, dragging their feet until she disappeared. Wells didn't realize the colonel beside him was the mastermind. Cyborg Sora was silent for a few seconds. Bang, star. Wells heard a loud crash from the transponder snail, making him jump. The colonel and the Marines behind him were sweating bullets. Ugh. Wells heard heavy breathing on the other end. Should the team return? Steelbone Sora's voice was tired and defeated before he hung up. Wells breathed a sigh of relief at the word return. It seemed General Steelbone Empty wasn't blaming him. The colonel and the Marines relaxed as well. Wells carefully put away the transponder snail and faced his team. Missions off. He led the way towards the port, followed by over 30 Marines. At Navy headquarters, Cyborg Kong slammed his fist on the table 3 times, the shock reverberating throughout the building. Warring States and Crane arrived together. What's wrong, General? Crane asked. Steelbone Sora rubbed his temples. It's Charlotte. He massacred almost 700 people at an auction house in 7 waters. Wells reported it. Take a look. Cyborg Kong played back Wells' report. Crane and Warring States frowned. They both saw the word slave. They were well aware of the slave trade, officially banned by the world government. Yet, 7 Waters was openly engaging in it. They were angry, but helpless. The Chambord Islands, closest to Marineford, had slave trades happening daily. The Navy turned a blind eye. They couldn't control it, and they weren't allowed to. There was too much involved. With the backing of the Celestial Dragons, Navy headquarters was powerless. Wasn't the mayor of 7 Waters a guy named Hoyle? An official with the world government, right? Crane's memory was sharp. Cyborg Sora nodded. Correct. Hoyle is a world government official stationed in 7 Waters, following their orders. Warring States didn't want to get involved. If world government officials were trading slaves openly, what was there to do? Seeing Warring States' expression, Steelbone's hollow sighed inwardly. This involves world government officials, so the Navy can't easily intervene. But we can still arrest Charlotte. However, we've lost track of him. He's disappeared. Finding a group of people in this vast ocean is too difficult. We'll have to abandon the search and increase the bounty instead. That should satisfy the world government. Chapter 80 Rewards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Cyborg Kong stared at the intel in his hand, a sigh escaping him. Sengoku and Crane exchanged a look, nodding in agreement with Kong's assessment. It's the only real option, Sengoku said. Even with the expanded recruitment, we can't just throw raw recruits into the fire. They need training. And to deal with Charlotte, Crane added, we need serious firepower. We don't have many who can even touch Charlotte in the first place. We certainly can't tie up our top brass chasing him around the globe, Kong stated. Sengoku turned to Kong. What kind of bounty are we talking? Charlotte's got a 5 billion berry price tag, top of the line. Kong rubbed his temples, clearly troubled. Bounties these days aren't just about money. They're status symbols, Kong sighed. Pirates flaunt them like trophies. Kong looked up, resolving his mind. Let's go with 1 billion. He's worth it. That swordsmanship alone warrants that much. Sora nodded. All right. I'll put up the notice. Crane announced, already moving. And include the red count too, Kong interjected. Let's peg him at 800 million. Just a hair below Charlotte. Might stir up some bad blood. Sengoku frowned. Isn't that a huge jump? What's the impact of raising prices like that? Kong waved it off. Impact? So what if more pirates crawl out of the woodwork? There aren't enough of them out there. He snorted, a dark humor coloring his tone. Ever since he became an admiral, Rox showed up with his crew. One Rox turned the second half of the Grand Line upside down. Then came the wannabes, and the pirate population just exploded. You can't stamp them out. Sengoku fell silent, the weight of the situation settling on him. Crane, seeing the discussion was over, turned to start drafting the bounty orders. Kong watched her go, already anticipating the chaos the new bounties would unleash. Sure enough, with the release of the order, news vendors swarmed the seas. On Beehive Island. Captain Rox, word from Captain Charlotte of the 8th Division. He's made a splash at Water 7, a subordinate burst in, thrusting a newspaper at Rox as he sat on his throne. Oh. Rox drawled, grabbing the paper with a flicker of interest. He scanned the headlines, his eyes passing over the long string of zeros, the photo covered in blood. Shocking. Bloody swordsman, Charlotte causes mayhem at Water 7. Massacred over 1,000 townspeople before vanishing under Navy pursuit. Rox tossed the paper aside, unimpressed. Small fry. Has Haiten Muchan returned? Not yet. We've urged them, but they claim a delay. Rox frowned. He pulled out a den mushy and dialed *bururu, *. It rang only once before being answered. Hey. Haiten Muchan, what's the status? Rox barked. Muchan immediately reported back, fear creeping into her voice. Captain Rox, we found a poneglyph referencing the King of Heaven. It mentions a location called God's Valley. We are investigating the exact location of God's Valley. Rox's face tightened at the mention of the King of Heaven in God's Valley, but he kept his voice steady. Okay. Keep digging. I expect results. Understood, Captain Rox. Muchan replied, hanging up. Sis. You really think that'll fool Rox? Haiten Chanwan asked nervously. Idiot. It's not about fooling him. It's about baiting him, giving him a choice. And I wasn't lying, you saw the poneglyph back home. It clearly mentions the King of Heaven and God's Valley. God's Valley is only said to open once every 40 years, and it just so happens that the next opening will be next year. Then why didn't you tell Rox God's Valley opens next year? Dummy. Tell him everything now, and we're worthless. We're captains because we're useful. No use, no survival in the Rox pirates. Don't forget, Charlotte almost killed you last time. If Rox hadn't intervened, you'd be 6 feet under. Muchan sighed. As members of the exiled Haiten clan, their only dream was to return to Wano. Now they are using the power of Rox to help them regain Wano country. What about the devil fruit? Any news? Muchan turned to her brother, her voice suddenly sharp. Nothing. I suspect Rox has it. How else would it vanish after all this time? The last person I questioned saw rocks on the island. I bet he grabbed it. Shanmura snapped to attention at the mention of the fruit, because that devil fruit is a symbol of Wano country. If they had that fruit, their heightened family would be able to return to the Wano country. Keep your ears open. Any whisper about that fruit, you let me know. Chanwan nodded, and Muchan relaxed slightly, out on the open sea. A merchant vessel cut through the waves. It was Charlotte's ship. Paul stared out at the water, bored. Suddenly, he spotted a newspaper gull circling overhead. His eyes lit up. Hey! Newspaper. I'll take one. The gull, hearing the shout, swooped down, spotting someone waving *caw. Caw, star. The gull landed near Paul. Paul tossed it 50 berries. The gull dropped a stack of newspapers in return. Paul snatched one, eager to see the latest news. The crew gathered around, the monotony of the voyage broken by the arrival of news.